Chapter 33. Grandpa didn't preach the sermon at his second home church service. He asked Queenie's husband, Loomis, to do it. Despite all the invites, the congregation didn't swell much that day. Only Mr. and Mrs. Craddock Flournoy came, probably because they liked Miss Love, but also because they liked to sing and couldn't bear the thought of trying to drag through another hymn with Miss Effie Bell feeling her way over the piano. But they claimed later they went to remind Cold Sassy in general, and the Methodists in particular, that God loves sinners and forgives them, and we ought to too. Cold Sassy thought Grandpa had really stepped out of bounds asking a Negro preacher to give the sermon. Old Loomis had preached many a one in the white kitchens of Cold Sassy. If he was bringing in stove wood and noticed a silver spoon that was tarnished, he'd say, "You know, white folks, religion be just like this here silver. You got to keep it polished regular or it don't shine, no sir." Every June during the time of our school exhibition, the graduating class gave orations and dialogues on Friday night. Then on Saturday night, the colored would make money for their church by putting on a show for us white folks. First they'd have a Negro minstrel, then a Negro sermon by Loomis, all dressed up in his dingy white vest, black pants, Jim Swing black tailcoat, and beaver hat. Later, after the spirituals, Loomis and old Uncle Lem would put on a debate, all in fun. Old Lem always took the negative, and Loomis the infirmity. I remember one time the evening ended with Loomis saying, "You know, white folks, when a man casts his bread pon the waters, it gwine come back buttered toast, praise Jesus." Passing his hat, he joked, "Tonight, I represents the waters, so cast your bread on me, and the good Lord gwine bless you gingerosity." Everybody laughed, and Loomis made some extra money. But everybody knows there's a difference between a colored preacher preaching in a white kitchen or at the Negro entertainments, and the same man preaching in a white parlor. Nobody blamed Loomis. He worked at the store, so he had to do what he was told. But Cold Sassy felt like Grandpa was slapping the town in the face all over again, and nobody doubted Miss Love had put him up to it. The Flournoys told it all over town what Loomis said at the end of his parlor sermon. "Mr. Rucker, sir, Miss Love, you all excuse me for saying so, but you all white peoples knows better to act like this. The Lord God wants peace amongst his peoples. He say, get on back to your own church and quit this here foolishness." I, for one, had a lot rather been hearing Loomis up at Grandpa's house than listening to the Presbyterian preacher saying what's going to happen to you if you dance, play cards, or spend your money on adornments like fur coats. There wasn't a fur coat in Cold Sassy, but any time he talked about sin, he brought up fur coats. Mama and I weren't really listening that morning, though. We were worrying about my daddy. He had stayed home, and he wasn't sick. Papa had been trying his best to cheer Mama up ever since the Tuesday before when, as Aunt Loma put it, Miss Love grabbed Sister's ticket to New York. Wednesday at breakfast, he even offered to take Mama to Atlanta for the day, but she said, "Hoyt, Tweety, I'm not about to be disrespectful of the dead for just a little old 70-mile trip." The next night, he actually stayed home with her instead of going to the Presbytery meeting. That worried Mama. She said, "Hoyt, you haven't missed a meeting since you had the flu 10 years ago. What will people think?" He touched her cheek real tender and said, "I'm tired, Mary Willis. I thought maybe you and me could go to bed early tonight." "Oh, pshaw, Hoyt," she said impatiently. But then she put her arms around his neck and her head on his shoulder and cried. Friday morning, Papa had taken the train to Atlanta. Business, he explained, but wouldn't say any more. When he got home late that evening, he was all smiles. After breakfast Saturday morning, when Mama wiped her mouth for him to kiss her goodbye, he kissed her twice and then came back and kissed her twice again. I wasn't the only one wondering what he was up to. Queenie said, "Lord Jesus, Mr. Will, your pa, he act like he got a diamond ring in his pocket." Queenie fried a chicken and cooked up a mess of vegetables for dinner that day, but I don't think Papa knew what he was eating. He talked a mile a minute the whole meal. He was so chock full of news, Mama nor I could get in a word. "Oh, by the way, Will," he said, forking a drumstick onto his plate, "a mill girl came in the store today to buy some black goods for a dress. Said her daddy died. She asked if I knew you." My heart thumped hard. Did she say her name? No, but she was a pretty little thing and clean. Toe-headed? Ain't they all toe-headed? Papa swished buttermilk in his mouth. I could tell he was watching me. Town people thought you couldn't be too careful when it was a question of your children hobnobbing with mill folks. It may have been the girl that helped me off the trestle. You know, after the train ran over me, I said casually. She's in my grade at school. Mama, can I have the chicken head? Don't you always? She suspicioned me too. Well, said my daddy, the girl asked me to tell you that her and her aunt are going to take her daddy back home to the mountains for burying. On the train? He shrugged. I reckon. Queenie was clearing the table. Papa put out a hand to stop her as she reached for the chicken platter. Mary Willis, he said to Mama, just look at that platter. Was it dirty or something? Mama looked, Queenie looked, I looked. Near as I could tell, it was just a wing, a back, and a gizzard laying lonely on the platter. That's all we have left over, Papa complained. Queenie, from now on, if you fry a pullet this small, fry two. Yes, sir, Mr. Hoyt. To Queenie, that just meant more for her to take home. But Papa saw it as his providing a bounteous table. I did admire his style that day. Some might think, what difference did it make? Who would know? Well, Queenie knew, and she would tell Loomis and her cousin Sissy Retta and all her friends who did yard work or cooked in white kitchens or took in washing or nursed white children. Naturally, they would all tell their white folks, and 2 days from now, everybody in town would know Mr. Hoyt Tweedy could afford more food than he needed. Papa had always been looked up to in Cold Sassy as a good man with a flair for good living. You wouldn't say he put on airs or pretended to be what he wasn't, but unlike Grandpa Blakesley, he liked seeming well off and modern. Unlike Mama, he didn't worry about folks thinking bad of him, but he always made sure they thought well of him. When Papa went back to the store after dinner, he was whistling. It wasn't until Sunday morning that Mama got really worried about him. After working till Saturday midnight at the store, he always bathed before he went to bed so he could sleep later on Sunday, and normally he was barely up in time to eat breakfast and get to Sunday school. But this Sabbath morning, he was already dressed when I went out to milk the cow. I could hear him singing and whistling clear to the barn. At breakfast, Mama said, "My, you feel good this morning, don't you, Hoyt?" And she smiled at him across the breakfast table. She looked real pretty in a new black and white striped wrapper, and instead of having her hair pulled back in a plain knot, she had done it up for church in a pompadour. You can imagine the shock when we got downstairs in our Sunday clothes, ready for Sunday school, and Papa said he wasn't going to go. It didn't make any sense. He was wearing his suit and had his Bible in his hand, but there he stood, saying he had to stay home. I noticed his hand shook a little and his eyes sparkled. We couldn't have been more dumbfounded. Papa was a deacon. Papa was clerk of the session. Papa was church treasurer. Papa couldn't just not go, for gosh sake. While Mama stared at him with her mouth open, I offered to stay home with him. You will not, he said sternly. You'll go on now. Make haste or you'll be late. He walked nervously to the door, looked up and down the street, then practically pushed us out onto the porch. When I looked back, he had sat down in the swing and opened his Bible. Mama was all to pieces as we went down the walk. Well, do you think he's gone crazy? She whispered, her face pale. After Sunday school, folks naturally asked where was Mr. Tweedy. Looking confused and flustered, which she was, Mama said weakly, "He seems to be ailing." I opened my mouth to say he looked all right to me, but she poked me in the ribs. When we got to our pew, Mama let me know what her real feel was. "I bet your daddy's up there with Pa and them," she whispered from behind the palm frond fan she was fluttering like a house afire. I shrugged, which was supposed to mean that couldn't be it. To tell the truth, that possibility was uppermost in my own mind, even though I couldn't believe it. Papa was anxious to please Grandpa, but not anxious enough to desecrate the Sabbath by singing songs like Bird in a Gilded Cage or Waltz Me Around Again, Willie. Certainly not Ta-Ra-Ra-Boom-De-Ay. As the Presbyterian preacher commenced his sermon, I was puzzled by the behavior of Mr. French Gordy, who sat with Miss Sarah in front of us, smelling of soap as usual. He kept turning around during the sermon to grin at us, yet when church finally lit out, he rushed past and didn't even wait for his wife, much less stop to ask Mama what my daddy was sick with. Everybody else did, however. Mama looked embarrassed and upset as she said over and over, "I don't know. I just don't know what's wrong with Mr. Tweedy." In a minute here, Mr. French came back, his ruddy face beaming, and took my mother's arm. "Mary Willis, how I wish your ma was alive to see this miracle. You and Will come outside and look." When she hesitated, kind of dazed, he pushed her toward the church's big open door. I ran ahead to go see. If Santa Claus had been out there with his sleigh and his reindeer that hot Sunday morning, it wouldn't have been any more surprising than the sight of Papa grinning like a Chessy cat from the driver's seat of a big, shiny red Cadillac car. He was wearing a cap and goggles, and his Sunday suit just barely showed under a long linen coat. The automobile had a black canvas roof, slotted rubber tires, and a brass horn, and was shimmying and shaking and backfiring to beat the band. "Papa!" I yelled, forgetting I wasn't supposed to holler in the churchyard. Everybody else had forgot, too. I was the first to reach the motor car, but the congregation quickly crowded around. "Mama!" I called, looking towards the church steps. "Come on!" Mama stood there on Mr. French's arm like she was looking at a man with a tail. She was pure transfixed, mouth gaping, eyes shining. There must have been 30 or 40 people crowded around, and they got quiet just from the sight of her. "Well, I declare, what don't you beat all," she said finally, and then, "Well, I swan, won't Mary Toy have a fit?" There wasn't a Presbyterian in Cold Sassy who wasn't proud for Mama at that moment. Something good had finally happened to Miss Mary Willis. I opened the back door, jumped in, bounced on the seat, and started asking Papa questions. With all the engine racket, he couldn't hear a word I said. He was busy shaking hands with all the men anyhow and getting slapped on the back and being asked for a ride. Boy, howdy, that was some morning. I'm not sure Mama ever would have made it to the Cadillac if Papa hadn't climbed out and gone to get her. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as he led her to his shaking red chariot. Picking up a new linen coat off the front seat, he held it out grandly for her to put on, then draped a big dust veil over her hat and face and handed her in. When she turned toward the congregation and waved, everybody smiled and clapped. And then the motor conked out. Papa was so excited he like to never got it started again. He cranked, then showed me how, and I cranked, but nothing happened. "Let me check the directions," he said, reaching in his pocket to take out a little booklet. It said he forgot to use the gas feed. Away we went at last, but we went away lots slower than if we'd had a horse and buggy. Papa hadn't practiced his driving but for a few minutes before church let out, so he wasn't all that sure he could remember where the foot brake was or how much gas to feed. Also, every time he saw a buggy or wagon coming, he had to stop the car and shut off the motor so the horses wouldn't pull. It was a slow progress till we were out in the country. As we got to going faster, a grand cloud of dust rose behind us, and folks ran out of their houses to watch us go by. Every time we hit a bump or just missed a squawking chicken, we'd laugh like children. Boy, howdy, what a day. Mama yelled over the racket, "Hoyt, I just can't believe it. When did you buy it? Can we afford it? Where did you have it